Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, really whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com, and we cover all of the above. Joined, as always, this week by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing on this kind of chilly December morning, Scott?
I'm a little chilly.
Yeah.
Got the big coat out.
Mm-hmm.
So, but hey, it's December. It's
always kind of fun, I think, to rediscover your winter wardrobe. Be like, oh, I like this sweater, or oh man, this coat really needs to be cleaned. It's those things you kind of stash in your closet in like March or whatever, and don't think about them for 6 or 7 months. The weather outside maybe, if not frightful, at least a bit variable. But inside here at Barbarian Productions in scenic Rocky Hill, it is warm and cozy, and we are going to talk about several things this week, actually. We do have a little bit of a preview of 2025 elections. That's right, we just finished one election, and we are heading toward another one. Some interesting news this week about developing a green workforce in Tennessee. What are we talking about? We are not talking about goblins or any other manifestations of greenness. Frogs, that's not what we mean. Knox County Schools is yanking some books from their school library shelves. We will hit on that. There was a couple of interesting indictments this week of Knox County employees and contractors having to do with misuse of federal rental assistance money. But to start out, I thought we would talk about something that the Knox County School Board spent most of this past week wrestling with, and that is their student harassment and discrimination policies. Talked about this a little bit in previous months because there were basically proposed policy changes to 3 particular policies, and the school board had already voted on these once in November. They voted to approve these changes on a split vote in November. There were some board members who continued to kind of push for changes to those proposals, and they did reach sort of a quasi-compromise at Thursday's board meeting. But basically, Scott, what this is all about is language, right? It's semantics.
That's what laws basically boil down to.
Yeah.
And, laws and ordinances and policies, they all boil down to language and how many times, as journalists, do we run across bills that have been passed either the legislature, either state level or local level, sometimes even federal level, where terms aren't defined.
Yeah.
And so if you can't define it, you can't, how do you interpret it, and how do you enforce whatever's going on in or follow however whatever's going on in the ordinance. So,
and if you are somebody who is subject to these laws or rules, which in this case we're talking about Knox County schools employees and students, how do you understand what the language actually means? Like, what does it signify sort of in your life? The interesting thing with these is that everybody agrees that the wording changes they're making in these policies, they all say, does not have any real legal impact on the actual protections people have. And what we're talking about with protections, these are discrimination and harassment policies. The old policies that they just changed, but the ones that have been in place for a number of years, basically said Knox County Schools does not, allow or tolerate any kind of discrimination or harassment of students. And then it listed out various ways they could be discriminated against, which were all drawn from federal civil rights laws. And so, students cannot be discriminated against or harassed on the basis of sex, race, religion, ethnic origin, kind of all of these different categories that we're all familiar with because we see this kind of boilerplate language drawn from these federal laws in a lot of areas of our lives. And what the school board did was basically remove most of those lists and replace them with the words on any basis. So instead of saying that students can't be discriminated against or harassed on the basis of, these like 8 different categories, it just says on any basis, period. And it takes out those lists. Now, what everybody agreed is that nothing about having that in school policy or not having it in school policy affects the actual federal laws. The federal laws are in place, and the school system has to follow them. Just because you take out the words that say you can't discriminate on the basis of race, sex, religion, etc., that doesn't mean you can suddenly start discriminating on that basis. These are federal protections. But there was concern, and as with so many things on our school board these days, our partisan school board, it's now been partisan for a couple of years after being nonpartisan for about 20 years, and it has 5 Republicans and 4 Democrats. And when there are controversial votes, more often than not, those are the lines they break down along. And so in November, when they voted on this the first time, it was the 5 Republicans who all voted to remove the specific language and just put in the kind of umbrella language, you can't discriminate on any basis. It was Democratic members who felt like there was value for the members, particularly of some of the minority groups in the school system, to having it spelled out anyway, that there was, some of the Democrats said, look, if you are, say, an LGBTQ student in Knox County Schools, or if you are a racial minority in Knox County Schools, there's some value and benefit to you and your family, especially if you feel like you are experiencing harassment or discrimination, to having a policy that you can go and read and look at and say, oh, like I'm clearly identified in here as somebody who should not be subject to harassment on the basis of, my race or sexual orientation or whatever. That was the concern. Republican members, on the other hand, said, saying on any basis is actually broader. It protects more people. It sends a message that, sure, there are all those various protected classes, but really what we're saying is we don't want any discrimination or harassment. Getting back to what you said, Scott, about legal definitions, one concern that some of the Democrats raised is that the phrase on any basis, while it is drawn from state law, there was a state law this year that got changed to basically, in one section of state law, spelling out teacher codes of ethics for Tennessee teachers, the legislature did a similar thing where they took out that long list of 8 or 9 categories and just said on any basis. So that was the ostensible reason for this proposed change. It's like, well, we're going to mirror what the state did in this one section of state law. But the concern that a lot of Democrats on the board raised is that when we say on any basis, we don't know what it means. Those other categories, race, sex, gender, etc., they have legal definitions. They have case law behind them. You can look and see what kinds of ways have school systems been found liable, for discriminating on the basis of those categories. We don't have any definitions or any case law for a policy that just says you can't discriminate on any basis. And as you've mentioned before when we've talked about this, Scott, it kind of leaves the door open, and board member Ann Templeton made this point this week. Students could say they're being discriminated against for just about anything.
Yeah, it's you're discriminating against me because I live in Rocky Hill, or Seth, or whatever.
The example
any basis, it means any basis whatsoever. So if a student who lives in a socioeconomically challenged neighborhood could, if they fail a class, their parents could feasibly sue the school board for discrimination because their child lives in a poorer neighborhood.
Right. You are being
that's any
discriminating
basis. That's a basis
against. Yeah. Well, the example that Ann Templeton gave was a student getting a bad grade on a paper. Yeah. Could say, well, you're discriminating against me because like you disagree with my point of view or whatever. Yeah. And Templeton's argument was that if we just have on any basis in here, teachers are not actually going to have good direction about what they need to be careful of, and that one of the benefits of spelling out some of those classes and categories is for employees to know these are the federal laws that you got to watch. There is no federal law protecting you from getting a C on your midterm, but there are federal laws.
Should be.
Right. There are federal laws protecting you from being discriminated against because of your race or gender and so forth. There was, after the vote in November on the first reading of this policy, when they change policies, they have to have two readings, do it twice. There was some pushback, and some members of the board said that they heard from people in the community, including, for example, parents of students with disabilities. Disabilities are another, people with disabilities, that's another protected category that was spelled out in some of these policies. And so they did come with a bit of a compromise. Board member Catherine Bike, who's one of the Democrats on the board, worked with Deputy Law Director Gary Dupler, who was kind of the driving force behind this whole thing, saying that the district needed to have its policies in line with this new change in this one state law. And basically, Dupler said he still thought that they should take out the long lists of protected categories in most places, but if they wanted to leave it in one sort of blanket policy, just to make clear that this is what we're talking about, and then also have the other policies refer back to that one. So there would be one place where there was a list of some of these categories that he thought that would be fine. And then in the other policies that they changed, they at least put in some language saying all, students can't be discriminated against on any basis. And Knox County Schools observes all federal and state civil rights laws, just kind of specifically putting in there, we are talking about federal civil rights laws here. And Bike said she still preferred to have all of the language in there, all of the lists, and all four Democrats still pushed for that at Thursday's meeting, but they didn't get any traction for that. What they wanted to do was just add that phrase on any basis to the existing policies. So it would say, can't be discriminated or harassed on any basis, including but not limited to, and then have the whole list: race, gender, sex, etc. They did not do that, but the Republican majority did agree with the change that Dupler said he was comfortable with, which was to leave the list in one place. Now, the list that got left in, because these lists were a little bit different in the three different policies, because there are different protected classes, there's different ways to refer to the protected classes. The list that got left in has sort of what you would call the big major categories: race, sex, religion, disabilities. But it does not include any words specifically having to do with sexual orientation or gender identity. Those words were in one of the other policies. The board, up until this past Thursday, the board was explicitly committed to protecting students from harassment on sexual orientation and gender identity grounds. That section got taken out of that policy. Those words do not occur in the list that was preserved. And so the functional result of all of this is that, A, nothing has changed legally. All the same legal protections that were there at the federal and state levels are still there. But when the board spends 3 months arguing back and forth over wording, over semantics, like we said, there's a reason for it. It's not like this was just some random discussion. The ostensible thing here was that Gary Dupler thought they needed to mirror the state law, but several of the Democratic board members pointed out that that's just not a compelling argument because A, the state law in no way says or indicates that school boards need to change their policies to reflect this change that was made in this one section of state law. And B, in contacting other districts around here, Maryville, Anderson County, the larger metro districts, Nashville, Memphis, and so forth, the school board members couldn't find a single other district that was doing this or that interpreted the law the way Dupler did. Basically, nobody else is taking this small change in state law as a cue to go in and completely rewrite all of their discrimination and harassment policies. And so the Democratic school board members were basically saying, clearly this is not something we have to do. This is a choice that's being made. And if you drill down into it a little bit, and we've talked about this before, but this is the third time in the last 8 years that Dupler specifically has brought proposals to the school board that specifically removed the wording around sexual orientation and gender identity. The previous times that he brought proposals, that was the only change. It was much more narrow. It was like, we want to take out these particular references to sexual orientation and gender identity. And he had other state and federal laws he referred to in those previous efforts, which those former school boards essentially ignored and did not take his advice on them. So this is the third time he's coming back. He did present a compromise, but if you kind of get into the fine print of it, what you see in that compromise is that specific language that Dupler pushed to remove in previous efforts around sexual orientation and gender identity, which, as we all know, have been the most consistently embattled and legislated categories here in Tennessee in recent years, that did happen. So even though he did offer the compromise that left in one set of categories in one policy, there is now, as far as I know, unless there's some other policy hidden somewhere that has them, no specific language left in Knox County Schools policies that talks about gender identity and sexual orientation. Does that matter? I don't know. Does it matter legally? Like, probably not, because, again, federal laws remain in force. Does it matter as a rhetorical move by the school board that at a certain point in the past, about 15 years ago, the school board deliberately added those words in, and now 15 plus years later, they're coming back and removing them? I mean, you can't say that it doesn't send some kind of message, right?
Well, one thing that it could do is if a parent has a question, they refer to the policy, they come across that list, and gender identity is not on the list, then it would be reasonable for them to assume that since there's a list and gender identity is not on it, that maybe it's not protected, even though it does also says on any basis.
Right.
I mean, there could be some. Again, we get down to semantics and language, a communications gap between what's in the policy and what is actually protected.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a point that Reverend John Butler, one of the Democrats on the board, made, was that, we're saying that this is an expansion and broadening of the policy by having this broader term on any basis. But he said, you don't broaden something by taking things away. And so, like, if you were just adding the words on any basis and kept the existing list, then you could definitely say, okay, this is giving it a broader, a more umbrella kind of shape to this policy. But if you're adding those words but taking out all of these other words, that doesn't really look like broadening. It looks like you're doing something other than broadening it. And
it could come down to just giving the illusion of that is the point. Yeah. And the point is not the policy. The point is appearing to not tolerate those things, but tolerating them because you have to under federal and state law. So
yes, and that was something that somebody actually said at public forum, was that they were. It was a teacher who came to speak and said they were bothered by the sort of constant referrals to, well, the federal laws are still in place. And Dupler even at one point said, as long as those federal laws are in place, like those categories are protected regardless of what it says in our policy. And the teacher came and talked about this, said, when you say that, it makes it sound like the only reason that we are protecting people is because the federal government's telling us we have to. And it kind of makes it sound like you wish you didn't have to. And that if the federal laws change, then there's not going to be anything in those policies that indicates a commitment by the school system to protect those groups. So,
and to be, brutally honest, ever since discrimination has been protected, there have been people who've wanted to not protect.
That's right.
Who wanted to remove those protections on multiple classes.
Yep.
That's not new. And that is, you at least give that appearance when you remove the words. Even though that, in the real world you're still going to have to enforce the discrimination laws or anti-discrimination laws, but it gives the appearance that
you'd rather not.
You'd rather not,
Yeah.
and or that you just don't.
Yeah.
It gives the appearance that you don't, and that could be the point.
Well, and so, one thing that people on sort of both sides of the debate on the board agreed on, Butler and board chair Betsy Henderson, is that regardless of the language in the board's policies, the actual important thing is, what does the school system do and how do they react when a student, a parent, a family comes forward and says, my student is being bullied, my student is being discriminated against, my child is being harassed. Like, how does the school system actually respond in those cases? And that's where, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the policies actually come into force. And regardless of the words in those policies, it's going to be the commitment of teachers, school administrators, and so forth to actually address those, which is something that lots of parents, and Butler said that, look, Butler's the only African-American member of the school board, and he said, even with the specific language that we have had for the last many years, we're still getting complaints of discrimination and harassment, and that's a regular thing. And so, that's the thing that the school system has to actually worry about beyond what's in the policies. So we will see if there are any, high profile complaints or anything that comes out of this rhetorical shift. But I think it is best understood as part of this broader picture. And it's the picture that you're saying exactly, Scott, that there are people who aren't comfortable with having all of those protections, and that they would prefer to not enumerate them any more than they have to.
Right. And there's one other thing that I wanted to bring up, and it's actually another, should be a, kind of a common ground for people of all sides, and regardless of whether you agree or disagree with Gary Dupler's interpretation of the law and his solutions for the policies, everyone has to agree that his holiday blazer that he wore to the meeting was absolutely fabulous.
It was a whole suit.
Well,
there were trousers that went with it too, and you can see a picture of that in our. We have a screenshot from the meeting showing Dupler's holiday suit. He wore it both Monday and at Thursday's meeting, and it's a green suit festooned with a pattern showing Christmas lights, and it lights up. It both Monday and Thursday's meetings, he was compelled by request from the school board to light up his suit. Oh, wow. Seth is actually showing us. Seth has a very similar suit right here in the studio.
I'm saving it for a Christmas party, not a public hearing or anything like that.
You and Gary Dupler must shop at the same store.
Sam's Club, I think so. Hey, I got a whole staff I got to impress with my threads, so I got to show it off when I can.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well. I think you should wear that to the next week's podcast.
Okay, everybody will enjoy seeing it, I'm sure.
Well, of course they will. They'll enjoy hearing.
I mean,
they will hear our laughter.
That's true.
And our, well,
when we get the eggnog out for our annual Christmas episode, I'll wear I'll wear my suit for sure.
I'll bring the nog. Okay, another thing to talk about. So we were just talking about federal laws and regulations, and another thing that there are a lot of federal laws and regulations around is the use of federal money. And Scott, of course, we know there were millions and millions of dollars in federal aid flowed out during the pandemic through a whole boatload of different programs targeted at different demographics and so forth. One of those was a lot of money for rental assistance to try to keep people, especially people who might be struggling economically during the pandemic, from losing their housing during the pandemic. So a whole lot of money came from the federal government, went out through local governments across the country, including here in Knox County. And anytime there's that much money sloshing around, there are going to be some people looking to avail themselves of it unjustly, and it looks like we had a little bit of that here in Knox County.
Yes, we did. 3 people were indicted. The indictments came down last month. They have arraignments coming up, so they haven't had a plea yet. But they basically were charged with theft and violation of the computer access laws regarding the rental assistance funds. And you're right, lots of money. This is a Treasury Department program. $46 billion went through to local governments, state and local governments all across the country. Knox County got a slice of it, and what they did was, and there are all kinds of eligibility things, and also what they did is, of course, they have to vet applicants. So what they did was contract out with the Knox County Community Action Committee, CAC, to do the initial vetting. They reviewed applications, passed along the ones that qualified to Knox County Grants and Community Development, and Knox County Grants and Community Development looked at them, reviewed the vetting, approved whoever, various recipients, passed that along to the finance department, they cut checks. And this assistance can go to landlords, can go to directly to the tenants, can go to utilities because utility payments were included, and could even go to if you have a gas system in your house, and people in the county who aren't on KUB, for example, can a lot of times they get liquid in a tank that they get used for a private company will come and change it out whenever they need to resupply, and that covers that. So I mean, all kinds of people can receive this funding. And what happened, and these were actually 2 separate incidents that apparently there's no connection with them whatsoever. There was no, as far as the state comptroller did the investigation, did not come up with any evidence apparently that they were connected in any way. But what happened was the county, when the county started looking at these transactions, these 2 things popped up. And what happened was, over in CAC, where they did the vetting, a woman named Jennifer Harper did the vetting for CAC. She was the housing stabilization specialist, and then from April to October in 2022, she and her husband, and what she did was she falsified, allegedly, she's innocent until proven guilty, allegedly used some false documentation, like ID numbers, things like that, and some that were real, and things like that. And she and her husband received $12,800 through the program. And one of the things that they did, the main thing they did was they claimed that Harper's husband, James Harper, was a landlord, and there was a house on their property that they claimed they were renting out to his son. But the investigators found that the house was basically dilapidated, didn't have electricity,
It's
didn't
like
have
a shack,
water.
basically.
Yeah, it's a shell of a house. At one point, it was a house, and now it's just a shell.
And more to the point, most likely nobody was living there.
Right, and so that was the main thing with Harper. But then you go over to grants and community development, and there's a woman who worked there who handled all this program, and her name was Amanda McKay, and Amanda McKay basically is the person who would take the items, the applications from CAC, and then pass them along to the finance department for payment. And they allege she misappropriated at least $79,679. One of the things that she did was, again, she used all of these the ID numbers and things like that, falsified those, and funneled payments to herself, essentially. And some of them were utility payments, some of them were various other things, and then there was another $9,000 or so that they couldn't prove that, or don't think they can prove that that money was misappropriated. But there's that as well. The total that they alleged was misappropriated was over $92,000.
Mm-hmm.
Now McKay was interesting. She worked for the county, then left county employment and was a contractor when they to finish. She left to take another job, but still was a contractor to finish up some of the projects she had been working on. And when they found this out, they did away with her contract. They terminated it. And they also CAC, Harper left the CAC to take another job somewhere else. So both McKay and the Harpers, both Harpers, grand jury passed down in indictments on all of them. Looking up for a second, looking back up all the charges, the charges against the Harpers, the CAC part of this was one count of theft of over $10,000 and a Computer Crimes Act violation of over $10,000. McKay, on the other hand, was a little bit tougher. One count of theft over $60,000, one count of violating the Computer Crimes Act of over $60,000, one count of forgery for over $60,000, and two counts of misconduct. So, especially for McKay, those are some pretty serious charges. One of the things is this went on, like I said, this went on for many months during 2022. And one of the things the comptroller said in their investigation was that Knox County and CAC were both a little lax in their controls, because you're supposed to have all these measures in place to double check these things and keep them from happening. The county has said, well, hey, we caught them. It shows we're working. The comptroller basically said, well, yeah, but if you'd had better systems in place, you would have caught them sooner.
Right.
Essentially. And so that was that. And, this is one of those things where this is money that was supposed to go to people who needed money because of the pandemic. They lost their jobs, whatever. and they really needed help, and they diverted almost $100,000 of that money, which, is a drop in the bucket to the feds, but it's $100,000 could have been that others could have used to make their rent payments, make their utility payments, all those things. So it was a pretty serious deal. Now, one of the things that's kind of complicated this and might have led to some oversight, or let it slip through the cracks, is county employees and CAC employees can qualify for these programs.
Right.
That's not, but they're not allowed to approve their own applications.
Right. They can't write themselves checks.
Yeah.
That's not okay.
When they approve their own applications, it's exactly what they're doing. They're writing themselves a check, essentially. And there's nothing wrong with a county employee applying for these funds if they
qualify.
If they qualify.
Yeah.
And but like I said, these are people who were supposedly, or not supposedly, they were charged with approving the applications, and they approved their own applications, and that just isn't kosher.
Yeah. Well, and it is worth keeping in mind that, like $100,000 or close to is definitely a good chunk of money. It is still a very small percentage of the millions, even just in Knox County. It is well over, I forget the total amount they got in rental assistance, but well over $10 million.
Yeah.
And so, again, like a small percentage of that. And of course, one point that advocates for these kinds of relief programs always like to point out when there is fraud and abuse is that most of the money, as far as we know, went to the people who needed it. And they caught, although, as you say, a couple years after the fact, the people who were misdirecting some of it.
Well, and I imagine, though, that also that if they are convicted, and again, they're innocent until proven guilty, or unless proven guilty, I think is a better way to put that. But if they are convicted, there will probably be some restitution involved.
Sure.
in their sentencing. So
yeah, you would definitely think so. And then I guess that money could go back into.
Well, the program is still funded through the end of this fiscal year, which is June 30th of 2025.
Mm-hmm.
So they're still going through that. Although that I don't know if I don't know. I did not ask, and I should have, if they're still taking applications for the program, because basically it's just for the next 6 months. So.
Well, and that'll probably be a good thing, maybe for us to follow up on next year as that program comes to an end. Be interesting to look and see, how many households were actually helped through this. Like what was the impact of it? But in the short term, we know that one of the impacts is that a couple of people got sticky fingers.
Yep,
allegedly sticky fingers. That's not the classic Rolling Stones album, Allegedly Sticky Fingers. All right. Another bit of school news. You may recall, we talked about this back over the summer. The school board passed a change in its library materials policy because of yet another change in state law. The state did amend the Age-Appropriate Materials Act this year to put in some very specific language about subject matter and content that is forbidden in school library collections across the state, and that includes any depictions of nudity, descriptions of explicit sexual activity, and also depictions of excessive violence. Those were the primary categories. And this marked a fairly big shift because up until now, state laws have been governed by the state's state laws on library materials have been governed by the state's obscenity statutes. And we have talked about this here. Obscenity is a legal term that has a fairly rigorous test that's been developed by the federal courts over the years for determining if something is obscene. And the The key issue with obscenity is that the Supreme Court has said that obscene speech is not protected by the First Amendment. Basically, we have freedom of speech in this country, but just outright obscenity does not enjoy those protections and can be regulated. But to prove that something is obscene, you have to meet this three-pronged test. One of the prongs of the test is whether the work has any literary, recognized literary, artistic, scientific value. But this new section of state law just kind of sidesteps all that, doesn't get into whether something is obscene or not, and just says if a work in a school library at any level from K-12 has any of these elements, depictions of nudity, descriptions of sexual activity or excessive violence, it is not appropriate for children in grades K through 12, just period. I think there are some interesting First Amendment questions about this, and I'm kind of wondering if that's not going to be, if we won't see this played out in federal courts in the near future, as districts across the state have been moving to try to interpret and enforce this new law and are now removing books from the shelves. But so far, as far as I know, there hasn't been a legal challenge filed against it. So every school district is trying to figure out, just kind of how to implement this. In some other districts, there was a list that came out from Wilson County in Middle Tennessee. They removed 390 books from their school library collections, a good number of books. In Knox County, so far, as of the list that was released this week, they have identified 48 books at elementary, middle, and high school levels that are being removed from school library shelves. Those all have to be removed. That basically they gave school staff until the holiday break to get all those off the shelves. And so this wasn't a surprise. We knew this was coming, and we've actually been asking the school system for the last few months, like, what's going on with this? We know you're going to remove some books. What books are you removing? And so they did release the list this week. And it's an interesting hodgepodge. It is heavily concentrated on books in high school libraries, as you might expect, because, that is the age group that more typically, is exposed to works written for that age group are more likely to include some of these forbidden things than books for elementary and middle schoolers, although there were a handful of elementary and middle school books removed as well. And I'm not familiar with every book on the list. Some of them are like contemporary graphic novels for, basically comic books, and or like books in recent fantasy series that are popular with kids these days. Sarah J. Maas, M-A-A-S, is a very popular writer. She has a series of books that are sort of taking a Game of Thrones type approach to fairy tales. So there's one that's kind of set in the Cinderella universe, but it's like Cinderella except with like fighting and apparently some sex scenes. And so a couple of books in that series were removed. But there were, Scott, some titles that are quite well known to most people. At the elementary school level, the Maurice Sendak book In the Night Kitchen, which is probably the second best known and popular Maurice Sendak book after Where the Wild Things Are. And In the Night Kitchen it's one of my favorite books was as a kid. I read it to my kids. It's, a little fantasy story. A little boy has a dream, essentially, where he goes to the night kitchen, which is populated by these giant cooks who are kind of going around the kitchen making food for the morning. And he has various adventures. He falls into the cake batter, and he makes an airplane out of cake batter and flies up in the air and ends up crashing into a giant bottle of milk. In the course of this book, there are a couple of pictures where the boy is unclothed. When he crashes that plane made of cake batter into the bottle of milk, the plane dissolves, and so then he's just floating in the bottle of milk. And in that picture of him floating in the bottle of milk, he's a naked little boy, and he has a teeny little naked little boy genitalia. It's literally just like a little curve drawn. It's a cartoonish illustration. There is, needless to say, nothing remotely sexual about this depiction. Nevertheless, it's nudity. That book is gone. There's a book called Draw Me a Star by the very popular author Eric Carle, who also wrote and illustrated the Hungry Caterpillar book that lots of people know. That book, I wasn't familiar with that book. I went to the Knox County Library, where you still can get these books because this law only applies to school libraries, and got out a couple of them, including that book. There is a drawing in the book of a naked man and woman, although to call them naked is only to say that, I mean, again, like it's very, like there's a little nub, I guess, that you can point at and say, well, that's clearly like the guy's penis, but certainly no more sexual than like your average like Greek statue that you see in a museum or something. And in fact, not even that explicit. It's literally just a couple of lines drawn. That book is gone. It's out. At the higher levels, a couple of acknowledged literary classics. Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, which has been periodically banned from school libraries basically ever since it was published in 1969, because it is mostly an anti-war book. That's the best way to think about Slaughterhouse-Five, and it's a great book. It's a classic. It's on, lots of lists of like the greatest American books of all time. Vonnegut was a beloved and acclaimed author. Slaughterhouse-Five is his most acclaimed book. It has been in the very recent past assigned as curriculum material in Knox County schools. My own son, the summer before his 9th grade year at L&N STEM Academy, they were given a list of books they could choose from to read one of those books as their summer reading for their 9th grade English class. He read Slaughterhouse-Five for his class,
freshman class,
at L&N STEM Academy, which is one of the, consistently ranks as one of the top 10 public high schools in Tennessee. So this is a book that's on the curriculum of one of the top schools in Tennessee, the top high school in Knox County, according to academic rankings. That book has been yanked out of libraries now because there are a couple of sex scenes. I didn't even remember there were sex scenes in this book. I had to go and look them up. We have a copy on the shelf. I pulled it down. And, Vonnegut could be a pretty funny writer. Mm-hmm. And so when there is depictions of sex in Vonnegut's work, it's not typically like pornographic. It's more often sort of like awkward and uncomfortable because that's the way he writes.
And to be honest, sometimes that's what sex is like.
That's the way that real life is too. And so like I looked up like one of these sex scenes that got this book removed. And it describes, Billy Pilgrim is the main character in the book. It describes Billy Pilgrim it says he was on top of Valencia, making love to her. So that's not very explicit, and that probably would not have gotten it yanked, I'm guessing. But then it goes on and it says, Billy made a noise like a rusty hinge and emptied his seminal vesicles into Valencia. So I'm sorry if any of you are getting like overheated out there at the mention of seminal vesicles, but that is an explicit description of like a biological thing that happens in the course of sexual intercourse. Sometimes, depending on who you're having sex with, I suppose. That got the book banned. And, to be clear, like these decisions on these identifications of this list, these were done by Knox County school librarians based on training they received and how to apply this new state law. I know some school librarians and librarians in general. And, I promise you that none of this is anything that any librarian wants to do. A lot of librarians, I think, see removing books from shelves as antithetical to their fundamental mission, which is to provide information to people. Mm-hmm. But they have to comply with the state law. They did their best to try to interpret it. And so this list of 48 books is what they have come up with so far. I think I'm going to leave that particular discussion there for now because we're going to have more detailed coverage and some discussion of the process that they went through to identify these books and also kind of what happens next in the implementation of this law. We'll be writing about that next week, so we'll probably talk about it in more detail on next week's podcast. But for now, we do have that list available on our website. And I think the school system has now posted it to their website as well. And it is 48 books, which is literal dozens. It is a lot fewer than some other districts are removing. And so I think you can see that the librarians are trying to be, they're not just like taking that list of books from Wilson County or wherever else and going and yanking those books. Like, they're doing their own reviews of all these things. And one of the interesting things about this is that this is all being driven by a state law, but as we were talking about vagueness in state laws earlier, and even as specific as this law gets in talking about depictions of nudity and explicit sexual activity, those things still require a certain amount of interpretation. Like, where are the lines on all of them? And I think it will be interesting to see across the state how different districts. Metro Nashville Public Schools, the only statement they've made on this so far is to come out and say, we feel pretty good about our selection criteria, and we've read the law, and we don't think we need to change anything. And maybe they're just leaving it up to see if any parents come and complain that they're in violation of the laws. Knox County's taken obviously a more proactive approach, although less aggressive than some other districts. So that's where we are on book banning. We'll have more to talk about that.
Yeah, one kind of interesting trivia thing related to that is we talked about Vonnegut and Slaughterhouse-Five. Many of our listeners probably know, many may not know that one of his the last places, idyllic places that he went to before World War II, and the events that he wrote about in Slaughterhouse-Five,
the firebombing of Dresden, that was the central event in Slaughterhouse-Five.
Yeah, he was in Knoxville for several weeks at the University of Tennessee on a military study. He had military study courses that he went through in March of 1944. At the end of the year, at the Battle of the Bulge, he was captured. He went to Dresden, where the firebombing occurred, and he and other prisoners were shepherded into slaughterhouses, hence the title Slaughterhouse-Five, and miraculously survived the firebombing, which killed thousands and thousands of people, utterly destroyed Dresden, a beautiful old medieval city. It was just, and it was the seminal event of that thing. And of course, it's an anti-war book, and part of being anti-war is before war there was life was good, and one of the last things of that pre-war life that he went through was at the University of Tennessee. In fact, he came back to the University of Tennessee and visited, and I think it was 2001, somewhere around in there, and said that he wanted to come back to see the campus.
Yeah, had some fondness for it.
Yeah,
because it was from that immediate time before he then went through this obviously horrific experience of being in war. According
to Betsy Creekmore, he went to Sevier County and partook of some of the clear
Mountain Dew
that Sevier County and other mountain communities in East Tennessee are famous for. So.
Some of that jar corn, right? That's what
yes,
it's called? The corn from a jar.
That's right. Well, yes, he and Vonnegut was known to enjoy a drink and a cigarette for sure. Okay, Scott, there was some interesting news this week from the University of Tennessee, working to try to build our ranks in our quote-unquote green workforce, in the green employment segments of the economy. What are we talking about?
Well, what we're talking about are jobs that are you would think of as being in the environmental section of the economy, which an expansive definition of that from solar installers to engineers to companies that are in the supply chain for things like wind turbines and also there's just it's a pretty big definition. But the University of Tennessee has a team that received a $750,000 grant. Basically, it's kind of a convoluted way of getting here from the Aries Foundation through a program that they have as a $25 million nationwide initiative that is and then goes through another layer. It's called Jobs for the Future, Quality Green Jobs Regional Challenge. So the University of Tennessee was one of 6 teams that across the country that received these grants. And what it is at least in what the University of Tennessee is doing, is they are going to disadvantaged populations and recruiting people to go into these green jobs if they need training, help them get training. But does a couple things. First, it improves the workforce, or increases the workforce, and then at the same time gives opportunities to people who come from economically challenged areas. And they're focusing, it's a both rural and urban focus. In Knox County, they're focusing on the inner city population, particularly black Knoxvillians. They're working through SEED. They're working through Connect Ministries. They're both local organizations that work with especially young people, trying to get employment opportunities for them. So their work, this initiative goes kind of hand in glove with what they do, and this funding is going to help them increase their capacity to bring more people, and they're also going to connect them with employers. So there was the one employer that they talked about is a company called Telos Global. They make frame parts for electric vehicles. Now they do other stuff too. I mean, but that's one of the things they do. You can go there. They offer an apprenticeship program, and people in this program would be able to go through an apprenticeship program, and either work for that company or tell us. One of their executives was talking to me, says, "Hey, if they want to go somewhere else, we'd rather them stay here, but if they want to go somewhere else, we're helping people's lives." So they're really looking at that program as being kind of a community benefit as much as it is a benefit for the company, and that's going to be they're going to primarily draw from Anderson and Campbell counties, and those are the other 2 counties outside of Knox that this program is targeting. Looking at the rural Appalachian poor folks who might not have otherwise have opportunities, and so they're also working with, and as you might guess, a lot of these jobs do require technical skills. Some of them require academic skills. Some of them whatever, and they're working with Pellissippi State and the Knoxville Oak Ridge Area Labor Council and the Tennessee College of Applied Technology in Jacksboro to the people who are going through these programs can go there and get training, and and these are not these are pretty decent jobs. I mean, we're talking they'll some of them make more than $30 an hour. It's a segment of the economy that's growing. Green jobs are, all the industry analysts talk about how they're growing and are going to continue to grow. And in 2 of the fastest growing positions in this area are wind turbine mechanics and solar installers, and they make around upper 40s, low 50s in annual salaries or wages, and that's nothing to sneeze at. And these are jobs that are growing fast. There are plenty of them, and this program is designed to train for those jobs, as well as these other jobs. Like I said, the pathway job, the supply chain jobs. There are a lot of companies that are doing they're doing cutting edge research on things like carbon recapture, and we've written about some of the companies that do that. And these are, we write about them because, these entrepreneurs who have PhDs and they're researchers and they do all those things. But whatever they come up with has to be built. It has to be installed. It has to be maintained. And so there are, you don't necessarily have to have a PhD in chemistry to contribute to the green economy. You can do it in many, many ways, and that's what this program is doing.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because obviously, like, we have a new presidential administration coming in that I think everybody anticipates is going to de-emphasize investment in anything to do with climate change, de-emphasize. There's talk that they might strip away, for example, the tax credit that you get for buying an electric vehicle, that kind of thing. But it seems like a lot of the people actually working in these industries feel like the industries themselves, the technology, they've reached a point where obviously government support is going to be helpful, because it probably always is. But that basically, like, a lot of these shifts, technological shifts, shifts in energy use and everything, are coming anyway, regardless of who's in the White House, because they make economic sense for a lot of people, and also a lot of people see opportunity there, both in terms of, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, but also in terms of, being trained for a job to go and work for somebody.
Yeah, there is obviously a lot of uncertainty about the new administration coming in, but as you mentioned, there are these companies, or a lot of these companies, are going green, quote unquote, because they want to go green, and it does make financial sense for them to go green, and the future of, at least the short-term future, at least the medium-term future for personal transportation is going to be electric vehicles. Mm-hmm. And regardless, now you can make policy changes to slow that down, but that's where we're going there. We are the movement away from fossil fuels to alternative fuels is happening, regardless of what the what administration is in power. I mean, one of the and you can make, as long as, and of course this is the argument always was, well, you can only do this because coal is cheap and yada yada. Well, yeah, but these other sources are becoming just about as cheap or cheaper than coal, and especially with the shift toward nuclear in some instances, that takes away the scale issue of decarbonization. And one thing is, most of the talk about fossil fuels, for example, has revolved around climate change, rightly so. You got to remember that it makes it easier to breathe
Right.
Even if you don't think it's doing anything to the climate, it can do stuff to your
There's
lungs.
tangible benefits. Yeah.
Yes, and so it does make the air cleaner, and so these trends. These are private sector trends that are going on with varying degrees of public support, but they'll go on regardless. And so these jobs, as the folks at UT pointed out, John Scheffner is the sociology professor who is in charge of the UT team. It's called East Tennessee Works, and points out that this is not just a workforce program, even though it is, and these companies are dying for workers. I mean, they're really desperate to hire people, as you hear from over and over again. And it's not just that; it's also building up communities that are primarily economically and socially disadvantaged. When you take someone who's has very few job prospects, they get out of high school, there aren't many jobs in the area, either because it's a rural area or you can't get in urban areas. You can't go work at the grocery store if you live in a food desert, and you're 19, 20 years old. So goes in and gives opportunities to these young people who to get in a pipeline for jobs that pay $55,000 a year and more, depending on the occupation. Those are just those jobs. If you're in manufacturing and for in the green supply chain, you could make a lot more. So that's the goal anyway, and they've got an ambitious goal. The goal is 5,000 employees added to the workforce over the next 3 years. So they've got their work cut out for them, but they're the UT folks are very enthusiastic about it, we'll have to keep tabs on how they
check back in 3 years and see how they're doing.
Yeah, see how close they've made it, and possibly even met their goal.
Right. All right. Well, the one other thing we wanted to mention is, yes, we are still in 2024. Yes, we did just recently have a fairly important election. The results and impact of which still have yet to be manifested. But there's another one coming, because in the off years here in Knoxville, at least if you are a City of Knoxville resident, the city has its elections. Specifically, this coming year, we are going to have 5 city council seats up for election. All of them are going to be open because all of the incumbents are term limited and cannot run again. And Scott, people are starting to line up.
They are. Traditionally, this is a cycle when we have lots of candidates because they've got their chance of getting in without having to face an incumbent. This is also going to be the first election under the new system of electing district representatives. In the past, the district voters chose the top 2 finishers. Voters citywide voted for those two, the representative from those 2 primary winners in the general election. Now you have the primary voters selecting the top 2 finishers in the primary, and then the district voters only voting for their representative in the general election. So there's going to be lots of new things going on. There's a new process and a lot of new faces. And,
right. And so there's these 5 seats up on the ballot. And as you're saying, in the past, what that would have meant was that each of those districts would have had a primary. But then in November, in the general election, everybody in the city, regardless of what district you live in, would have been able to vote in all 5 of those races. And that is not what we're going to have.
No. In fact, in the past, during this particular cycle, you would have, regardless of what district you lived in, regardless of what district you lived in, you would go to the polls in the general election, and you would have 5 races to choose from, and vote in all 5. In 2025, you will go in the general election, and you will have 1 race to vote on, and that's your district race.
Unless you live in the 5th district, which isn't on the ballot this year, and so those of us who live in the 5th district are not going to have anything to vote on this year.
That's true, and so that will change in the coming years. In 2027, the 5th district seat is up then because it's on a different election cycle, or has been. There will be an election 2027 for the 5th district seat under the new rules, and then but that election, the representative who wins that will only serve 2 terms, and that will 2 years in their term, and that will merge the 5th district into the other district elections, the other district election cycle. So we'll have 1 cycle that's district only, another cycle that is at large mayor and municipal judge. So anyway, but we've had people who, instead of just being theoretically running, we've got people who are actually taking steps to run. Real flesh and blood people. One has officially announced her candidacy is Karen Adams. She is probably best known for serving on the Knox County Planning Commission. She is running for the 1st district seat in South Knoxville. She announced her candidacy just this week. There are 2 other people who have named treasurers, which enables them. That's the first step you really need to take to run for office, is name a campaign treasurer. Adams obviously has done so as well. But 2 other people have named treasurers. That enables you to raise money, raise funds, and so it's always considered the first step. Those people are Jody Mullins in the 3rd district. Mullins is a Cumberland Estates resident, actually ran for that seat in 2017, but finished 3rd in a 4-person primary, so did not go on to the general election. But Mullins is going to be running, very well known in the area. He's done a lot of community work up there with neighborhood association work and that sort of thing. And then there's another person, and my apologies if I mispronounce this person's name. It's Matthew DeBartolabin, or Laban?
DeBartolabin, I believe.
Laban, hopefully when I talk to Matthew in the coming weeks, he will definitely slap me around and make sure that I know how to pronounce his name. He's running in the 4th district, which is Old North Knoxville, up the east side of Broadway, into Fountain City, the east side of Fountain City, and then over toward Knoxville Center, and then eventually to Holston Hills. So it's it's a kind of almost a sprawling district, but it's a big district. Lauren Ryder has served the last 2 terms, and DeBartolabin is the first person to throw his hat in the ring. He lives in Old North Knoxville. It's interesting. He's a renter, and so he's going to bring that too as a thing to the table. He works in real estate. He is active in the Pichacucha
Pachacacha.
or whatever. I never can. You know, when I see that, I always just say Machu Picchu. So that's,
Right.
but anyway, I'm not good at pronouncing that. Although I think, we've been there. It's a really great thing to go to. But he's active there, and he serves on the design review board. Is one of the things. So he does have public service experience, and so he's running in the 4th district. I kind of anticipate that after the first of the year, especially, we'll be getting a lot of people naming treasurers. Some may even wait. It's not until late May, I believe, that the petitions are due. I mean,
Right.
you can't even pick a petition up yet, and that's when you really run for office. Getting a treasurer is kind of a preliminary step. When you're really running is when you turn in your petition.
You get your minimum of 25 valid signatures of district voters, and you file it, and then you're a candidate.
Yeah, and you can, and we've seen this in the past. We've had people who talk a good game about running, this, that, I want to run, and then they don't. They wind up not filing for whatever reason. So, but anyway, so we've got 3 people who are interested already. I would not be surprised if that increases tenfold over the 5 seats between now.
Yeah, sometimes
and
with these open seat primaries, we've had more than 10 candidates in a given district.
Yeah, the 6th district, which is East Knoxville through downtown and Mechanicsville and over into West Haven. It's the only minority district in the city. 8 years ago, I believe 12
or 13
candidates for that seat, and
that district also often has pretty low turnout. So in the primary, I think some of those candidates were in the literal single or double digits.
It's
they got. I guess I don't think there were any single digit ones, but there were definitely some double digit ones.
Oh, absolutely. And so we expect that I would expect at least 2, maybe 3 dozen candidates for the races overall, and especially now, people grasp the changes to the.
You only have to run in your district. You are not facing, which I think lowers the bar for people who might be thinking about it, since you're not facing a citywide general election anymore. It makes it a more contained and I think probably more affordable campaign for people to run. Yeah,
because you only have to run in your district. It reduces the number of people you have to reach by a phenomenal amount. I mean, you used to have to reach everybody. Now you just have to reach 1/6 of the population, and really it's only the registered.
Tiny number of voters.
The tiny number of voters within 1/6 of the population. Yeah. So it's it could encourage people who are well known and very active within their district, but who don't have citywide networks to run. For example, I think you could say Karen Adams has a citywide network that she works with. She's been, was it IMES she was on the board of? And
she's been very active in the community.
And of course, serving on the Planning Commission. Definitely has a citywide network of people, but she also could be facing candidates who are just as strong as she is within the 1st district, who might not run citywide because they don't know anybody, or enough people outside of South Knoxville, don't think they can raise enough money to compete if they have to run, campaign for votes outside of South Knoxville. But now they don't, and they can, they could be a formidable challenge. And so I expect that there will be, that will actually increase the number of people who run in multiple districts. People who are active in neighborhood groups within in Fountain City, but don't have much interaction with people outside of Fountain City. Well, they can run to represent Fountain City.
Yep.
and have a better chance of prevailing than they would, and certainly a less expensive campaign than they would if they had to run citywide in general.
Well, over in the 5th District, we're just going to put our feet up and watch y'all sort it out. We don't have any dogs in the fight this coming year. All right. Well, we can look ahead to the coming week. Got a passel of local government meetings. Everybody rushing to finish up their work before the holidays get here. Scott County Commission on Monday is having its monthly optional agenda review meeting and its zoning meeting.
Yeah, the agenda review begins at 3 on Monday. Zonings begin at 5. If it's optional agenda review, does that mean it's optional for us to cover? No, it does not. It's mandatory that we cover, and we will. And an agenda review, of course, they're reviewing the agenda that they will actually vote on next week. So one of the interesting things that they're gonna look at is the residential infrastructure policy, which is basically a way of getting people who buy into new subdivisions to pay for infrastructure improvements caused by that subdivision's construction. It's allowed by state law. The county is going to be adopting a policy. One of the things was we are taping this on Friday as of late Friday morning, as of late Thursday night. A draft of the policy has not been posted to the county commission website. The mayor's office is coming up with this policy, but it is a way to pay for road improvements that are clamored for by residents in these areas where new developments are going in, and they can be quite expensive. And the county government doesn't want to pay for them. Essentially, developers don't want to pay for them. Residents who already live in these areas don't want to endure the heavier traffic. But somebody's got to pay for it, and that's one thing that's going on. Another thing that's going on the agenda as well is this is something that predates this, is the road improvements to Belltown, which is the huge small town size development in North Knox County. They're going to be doing road improvements up there. They're going to be voting on that. Or not, they'll be they could be discussing that at the agenda review. Again, all these things can be discussed, but don't have to be discussed. One thing that might be ripe for discussion, don't know, is the county is going to be distributing $26.2 million in American Rescue Plan Act funding from the federal government. Of course, remember that came through from COVID. That almost $17 million of that is going to go toward building a new engineering and public works building. About $6 billion will be going to stormwater projects, and various other things get the balance. And one of the things that might be interesting is, remember, these are federal dollars. They're coming down from a Biden administration initiative in response to COVID. And on county commission, South Knox County Representative Andy Fox has repeatedly said that Knox County shouldn't take federal money, that the federal deficit is too deep, the debt is too high, and so that might end up being an interesting conversation to have there. Of course, Knox County already has this money. I don't know how
they've already received the money. They're unlikely to send it back, although maybe that's what Fox thinks they should do. I guess
he might, but there's also the matter of if they do want to build a public works building, and they on the off chance they send it back. Where does that $26 million come from?
Pay for it.
But anyway, that's but yeah, regardless of whether Fox is for it or against it, that's a pretty significant thing that the county is going to be doing. In the zoning portion of the zoning meeting that's going to be at 5, one of the interesting things that's going to go on there is there's a proposal that was rejected by the Planning Commission. A property owner in South Knox County whose property it's residential property, and it's surrounded by property owned by Thunder Mountain, which we've talked about quite extensively, is this large residential development that's going to go in South Knox County down near Seymour in the Sevier County line. And this property owner wants to have their property rezoned so they can convert their house there, which is an older historic house, into a country inn, essentially I don't know if it'd be bed and breakfast, country inn, something along those lines. Planning Commission rejected it because it's a residential property in the middle that is literally in the middle of a donut of other residential properties, and that kind of spot zoning is quite frowned upon in planning circles. But the owner of the property, undaunted, has appealed the Planning Commission's decision to Knox County Commission, and Knox, and this is true with the county for City Council as well. Knox County Commission, City Council don't necessarily look at these projects through the same lens as Planning Commission and planning staff. So it'll be interesting to see if the property owner gets any support for this project. And one of the we've talked about this before. It's a rezoning request. Planning commissioners always they only always look at all potential uses for a property and not just what the developer might have in mind, because whoever owns that property in the future can do whatever is allowed. And commercial, there's nobody's talking about putting in a convenience store up there. I don't know why they would, but they could in a commercial zone. And so we'll kind of be interesting to see if Planning Commission or if the County Commission has a different take on this than Planning Commission.
All right, and then Tuesday, City Council's up to bat.
City Council's coming in, and the most interesting thing on the agenda for City Council is the sanitary laundry building, which we wrote about earlier this year. It's a historic building on Broadway near the intersection with Central Street, kind of that old commercial center there. It was a commercial laundry. It's been closed for years. An environmental nightmare. The city took it over. They have done some environmental remediation to it. And we wrote about it earlier this year because McCarty, the architecture firm, was going to buy the building and use it and renovate it into their headquarters. Well, they said they would be doing this when we talked to them then. Now they're asking the city for a payment in lieu of tax agreement to help make it financially feasible. It is going to have some other commercial space in it, so there will be some office / commercial space that they will lease out, as well as having their own headquarters there. But the interesting thing is that it's going to be a 10-year pilot, which means usually means that after the construction's over, which will take about 2 years, for 10 years, their property taxes will be frozen at the current levels. Well, that usually that means, there are a few $1,000s that an underdeveloped piece of property pays a year in property taxes, and then at the end of the 10-year period, you go up to the full rate at that time, as far as the property tax payments. So it's based on the full appraisal. But for 10 years, you pay basically what the previous owner has paid. Well, the previous owner of this building is the city of Knoxville. The city of Knoxville has paid, obviously, no property taxes. So the payment in lieu of tax that McCarty Wholesale will have to pay is zero. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of an odd thing, but they will not have to pay property taxes or a payment in lieu of property taxes until that 10-year period is over. And
there may be some discussion on council about that, but I have to imagine from the point of view of the city administration, a deal to get this property off of their books and off of their to-do list, I'm sure is very attractive. This has been a long process.
Oh, yeah. This has gone on for years and years and years. This is, you could make the argument they are literally paying someone to take it off their hands, and they would gladly pay someone to take it off their hands because it is a problematic piece of property. There's just no doubt about it.
And it's also a nice historic building. It's in an area there right near the intersection of Broadway and Central that's, seen a lot of new investment in recent years. So it really is kind of prime for redevelopment. So although it has taken a long time, the timing is probably actually pretty good for somebody to be going in there with a new commercial development.
Yeah. You've got Axle Logistics around the corner on Central. Of course, you've got Happy Holler, down the road on Central. You have there's other investments are going on around that intersection.
Emory Place, right across Broadway. Yeah,
you've got Emory Place right there. So it has taken that portion of the urban core a long time to start to redevelop, and it really is, and it's getting a little bit of momentum. And I think that I'm sure that that there's a lot of support on this for this project on City Council already. Lauren Ryder and Gwen McKenzie, whose districts kind of converge right through there, are both supportive of it, and so there's really, the city's not going to get any taxes on the next 10 years anyway,
right?
So this
continue to receive what they've been receiving.
Yeah, they'll continue to receive that, but after 10 years. It'll be worth a lot more money, and they'll be able to pull that in. Then Thursday, more development stuff. We got the
back to the well.
Golly, it's going to be development week next week. Planning Commission's going to be meeting. There are a couple of things. One, developer R. Bentley Marlowe is back. He's been quite active at Planning Commission lately. He is probably the most active developer of what we always call middle housing or missing middle housing inside the city of Knoxville. He's had more of those projects. He develops primarily in Mechanicsville. He's had 2 proposals be denied by staff before it even gets to Planning Commission, middle housing projects, and he's appealing those staff decisions to the Planning Commission. So we'll be talking about that. Got another developer, Scott Davis, very prominent, very active developer, has a couple of. It's kind of interesting. He's got this property out in East Knox County at Thorn Grove Pike and Straw Plains Pike. Over 30 acres. It's kind of divided into 2 parcels. It's all wooded. It's all hilly. It's hard to develop. one of the parcels, he wanted to develop 5 units, 5 houses per acre on this property, about the 20-acre section of it. And because it's hilly, because it's forested, because it's rural, the planning staff has only recommended 1. He's asked for 9 units on the other 12 acres, 9 units an acre, and they're only recommending 5. So it's kind of weird that these are 2 separate requests on basically two adjoining pieces of property by the same developer. But he could have plans for 2 separate subdivisions. Who knows? But anyway, that will probably generate some discussion, in part because for one of the parcels, the kind of the plan that it was has been zoned under predates the comprehensive plan that was just passed. There's a conflict in that. There'll be one of those technical discussions that we'll be following and explaining. Another thing that's popping up is this is the long delayed easy stop proposed for Concord Road, which is heavily traveled between Farragut and Choteau. It was originally proposed in a 7,000 square foot building with a drive-through and a restaurant. Well, it was denied because building was too big. They've lopped off the drive-through. They've reduced the footprint of the building to under 5,000 square feet, and they're back. And so this is, as I said, it's a very well traveled stretch of road in West Knox County. It will probably wouldn't add traffic. But it would definitely be a place where people who use that road could stop off and fill up with gas, buy some stuff, but
use the restroom.
But it's been kind of controversial out there, as most developments in
development in Concord and Choteau. Controversial? What?
Yes. So anyway, that there'll be plenty of other things going on at Planning Commission. There's always a bunch of rezonings, always plans approvals, always typically there are always 1 or 2 neighborhood groups that are very angry about developments coming in. We'll be there. We'll cover all of it and let you know what happened.
All right. Well, we will be back here next week to talk about those things and anything else that happens in the interim, including some more discussion of those banned books. Maybe we will read some more racy passages.
Oh, that'd be good.
See if we can find any more discussions of human anatomy. Thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber for his production work here with Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright. Everybody stay warm out there. We'll talk to you next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.